So thank you so much for joining us for our December Collaborative Cafe, where we're going to be focusing on HR trends for 2025. So taking a look at today's agenda, we'll start with a welcome, little introductions of our panelists here today. We'll do a topic interview with our specialist here. We'll then do our traditional breakout discussions where we get to break out and talk amongst one another. Then we'll get back together as a group, of course, saving time for Q&A at the end before we wrap up and talk about next things on the horizon. A little bit about our team. Most of you, if you've attended a cafe before, you know myself. I'm Lisa Brown. I'll be serving as your host today. I'm the Vice President of Client Services here at HR Collaborative, and I am delighted to introduce you to our panelist here today. Our panelist here today is Jordan Ferrario. She's one of our talented HR business partners here at HR Collaborative and a talent community member as well. Jordan's been with us for a little over a year now. Jordan's background, so she specializes in employee relations and organizational development. She's dedicated to fostering an inclusive culture, aligning HR strategies with business goals by utilizing more than 15 years of experience in people management. So Jordan, I'm going to kick it off to you. I'm going to toss it over to you to kick off our conversation. And we are all wishing we had a crystal ball, right? So we knew what the new year was going to, take us into, what businesses need to focus on, what HR folks need to focus on. And you've really broken it down into three primary trends and areas that we're likely going to need to focus on in the new year, or that business partners or that businesses are going to. So I'm going to relinquish my control of the remote while I toss some questions your way and you educate us. So our first trend here today.
All right. So when looking at this list, the list never ends, right?
Oh, sure.
Just like a day in HR, the list never ends. You're never finished, but you have to feel like you are. Find a way to, in this example, become more agile. How can you accommodate the new compliance changes? And this covers a lot of different areas. One thing you think of first is we thought the FLSA changes were coming through, and they aren't. But what that does help us understand is that every year, really, you can be looking at your roles. What is the non-exempt status? What is the exempt status of each of your roles? And is it still accurate? That's a great time to update job descriptions and make sure that your organization is compliant in that area. Embedding HR in business goals, you want to be sure that you have the knowledge and understanding that your specific business needs to be sure that you are the HR person for that organization. So we all in HR want to know everything. We want to learn everything. It's HR topics that are important to us, but what's important to your specific area. So keep that in mind.
How do you embed HR in your business goals? What are some ways that organizations can do that?
I think the first piece is finding those key relationships in the organization. How can you make sure that you and the leadership are aligned and that you understand what their goals are? So like I said, you may have your own HR goals, but how do you combine that with the greater organization and understand what they need?
Gotcha. Great.
And then for yourself as an HR person, one way to complement that, I think, and truly become more agile, because this concept actually, as our article shows that we'll share later, originates from the agile concept from a development standpoint and a computer programming standpoint, but continuous growth and understanding, what does your organization need? What does the world around your organization need? Who are your customers? And how does your performance and your knowledge complement that?
Absolutely. Great. What else is coming up?
Well, a lot more.
Oh. One thing that's constant is change, right?
It is. One thing that is constant is change. I know with compliance in the prior slide, I didn't mention ESTA. It's kind of the word we don't like to say. We don't know much about it yet, but we almost know too much, but then what do we do with it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And how does the organization respond? How does leadership respond? We still don't quite know, I think, all the details, but with what we know, we have to do the best we can. Right. And
Absolutely.
so, the clients that we've spoken with, we just want to be the best partner we can and help them understand. I think our webinar with Varnum was a great complementary piece to this area.
Yeah.
But there's so many great resources out there. There's a variety of different organizations trying to understand what is the focus there, and not only how do we comply, but how do we make sure the organization understands that we're doing the best we can. you know? We don't want to take away time off, but there's going to be a change.
Yeah.
Succession planning is an area that many organizations, I think even smaller organizations, might not always think of. Things are moving a million miles an hour. If you're an HR department of one, this is something that probably is on the back burner until it is relevant, and then it's too late. And I shouldn't say it's too late, but then it's very late. You know, it's
challenging for sure.
And so if you're not thinking about this, it's a great time even just to look at the workforce, talk with leadership about their plans. What are their goals? Where are they headed? Is retirement, you know, on the horizon?
Yeah. And succession planning isn't always because we're trying to move somebody out or that they're planning to retire or that we're planning on making changes. It's really about just preparing that next level, because you never know. I mean, win the lottery and move to your favorite place on earth. It's for good reasons too. But you know, the business had, you know, in order to sustain itself, there needs to be a plan in place. So it could be for, you know, good reasons and reasons, you know, that are expected. So that's a really great point.
And it's an opportunity to grow individuals in the organization. How can they move forward? How can they become, you know, more relevant to the industry? With relevance comes AI. And I don't know if you've heard this other term, HI. So this is human intelligence.
Sure.
This is our HR. These are our human resources. They are humans. They're intelligent most of the time. Just kidding. No.
We hope so.
We hope so. We all try to be every day, right? But AI is not only becoming continually more relevant, but it can change the way work is done in a way that you might not see right away, but that will impact culture, that will impact productivity, and it can be for the better. But you've got to be sure you approach it in a way that you know, is not only compliant to your industry, but that is, you know, I would say maybe taking baby steps.
Sure.
Let's not just put a handbook in ChatGPT and ask for something back, you know,
and just take it at its face value.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, I think a lot of people, when we heard the term AI, like, oh my gosh, robots are going to be taking all of these humans' jobs, and it's basically going to replace us. And that's not at all what's happened, what's going to happen. There's automation that's been happening for decades, right? It's more the it's changing the way that we work. It's in some cases it's helping us be more, you know, streamlined or efficient in the way that we work, but it's not seamless because artificial intelligence was still built by humans. And so it's the algorithms are based on how we've programmed it. So I think a lot of organizations with this change management is how to use it responsibly.
Absolutely.
Right? Compliance and responsibility and validate.
And there are some great policies out there of varying degrees of how does your organization use this? Why is your organization using this? And how to approach it, you know, the best way. There may not be an exact right way, but there's a good way to roll that out.
Is it one of your recommendations, if for those on the call today whose organization doesn't have an AI policy currently, is that something that companies should be looking at to set those guide rails or parameters in the new year?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, SHRM has examples. There's even other examples out there. As well, and you know, Mineral is a great resource. I know we utilize, but ultimately there's a lot that's being done to make sure that this happens in a way that where you get the best out of it.
Sure. Yeah. Definitely want to make sure we leverage the resources, but use it responsibly.
So with AI, you know, that's a learning mechanism. If you can work with AI and be productive, good for you. It's continual growth, and then micro-certifications can complement that as well, and self-learning. So one area that I think of, I know SHRM has 5 or 6 different separate, you know, mini certifications, I guess we'll call them, that can be really valuable, but many other licensors, you know, have that as well. One is as a mental health advocate in the workplace, and it comes with a variety of training. And then that credential, I think, can really bring you forward as an HR leader. But there's so many others out there as well. You know, investigations, even data analytics. You know, data is still at the forefront of HR. If we could tell that story with data, then I think that'll actually bring us into that change management zone.
Yeah, I think that's really important for HR practitioners to leverage, because a lot of times business owners, not that business owners don't care about the people, but a lot of times if they're going to be investing in initiatives or investing in their people, they want to know kind of like, what is the ROI on that?
Right.
What am I getting out
Right.
of it? So using data as using data as an ally and a tool for us to tell the bigger story or make our business case in HR as to why these people initiatives are important.
Absolutely.
It's going to be critical, I think, in getting the support from the rest of the leadership team, in pushing forward some of the initiatives that you're sharing with us today. We should probably be focused on. So
absolutely, and that human-centric piece is key.
yeah,
But you as the HR person or HR team, let's hope there's others, but if not, it's you, and you're doing a great job. And keep the people in mind, right? That is your role. And emotional intelligence comes with that. I think a lot of HR people have had this on their minds for a long time. But the topic itself for leadership and like top leadership in organizations came forward very much during COVID. We were all experiencing something for the first time at the same time. Previous generations had, other iterations of this in different ways, but the entire world having something happen at the same time brought to the forefront, how do we deal with mental health? How do we make sure we're focused on the whole person and not just the job, that we're spending the majority of our, waking hours at work? How do we make sure that people have what they need? So we would see a lot of flexibility there.
yes,
With hybrid and remote teams. Now outside of COVID, and as we move forward more productively with these flexibility elements in mind, there's generations coming back to work. There's certainly young generations coming into work, but 75 plus is coming back to work. Yeah. And we all want to work productively together. How do we make that happen? How do we make sure we're considering all angles? So with like diversity and inclusion and the human-centric element, it takes on a different lens.
yeah. I'd say I've even heard quite a bit from clients, very much along the lines of what you're saying. But with the hybrid and remote, it's not necessarily about where I work, but it's how I work and when I work.
Yep.
So that flexibility piece really is key. Like I forgot the particular statistic, but over half of college graduates actually want to go work in person. It's not that like, if I can't work remote, I'm never going to work for you. Right. But it's finding that balance. So sometimes it's the flexibility to work, start your day later and end later, or on the inverse, start earlier and end earlier, or 4-day work weeks, or, you can't do everything at every organization. Sure. There's some, manufacturing, production, you have to be in person to make the widgets or get the things out the door. But there's nothing saying you couldn't stagger shifts, so that you couldn't kind of phase the work differently to meet the needs of your workforce. And, looking at the 5 generations in the workforce, especially those that are coming back, maybe doing kind of a phased retirement, or they're not ready to completely sign off, is you got to look, at your humans that are doing the work, and have a holistic approach to benefits and policies to make sure you're able to provide that's most beneficial to your entire workforce, or those that you're looking to attract to bring in to the workforce. So all right. Well, I mean, gosh, that's a lot.
It is a lot.
Of
we could
trends.
go on. Like I said, the list is volumes. And there's topics we haven't covered today, but I know we look forward to what we'll be rolling out in the new year. And I think we'll touch on that later. Yeah. I think that this is just, the tip of the iceberg. Right. I think there's definitely a lot to unpack and uncover. And then, these really are the 3 that rose to the top. Right. So absolutely. Want to give you all now some time to have some conversation about what you've heard, what you're experiencing, what the trends are that you're expecting to see. Maybe they're the same, maybe they're different. So we're going to now head out into our breakout rooms. What we'd really like you all to talk about is what your top HR priority is for 2025. Thanks for coming back, everyone. I hope you had some great conversations. Saw lots of notes being taken, lots of good conversation must have been being had. No surprise there. I'm sure some of you also curious if there's a crystal ball in one of your group members had. So some of the breakout themes that we noticed between the different groups was, first and foremost, compliance. We've seen and heard and
There's been a lot of educational opportunities on ESTA, and we know we're following it diligently. It's probably weekly updates. But I think what most organizations are concerned about or focused on really is the what, the why, and the how. The what is what has been shared with us by the state of Michigan, right? This is what we know it's going to be. It's going to take effect in February, and we have to, as an organization, prepare for it. The why, I had seen the comment there, and I've heard it over and over again at different events. It's like, can we just remind people that they voted for this? And it's like, well, yeah, but is that really going to help us at all? I think the bigger why is the message about why this was proposed in the first place and what it's aimed to achieve, which is really to provide that compensation and protection for individuals that traditionally wouldn't have that that protection or compensation during times of individual or family needs for medical reasons. It's not to make things more complicated. It's really to provide those protections and be beneficial for employees.
And from, a hospitality industry perspective, I think that's where like we're seeing the biggest impact, the biggest challenge, that maybe that workforce, especially on a part-time basis, hasn't had the need for this, but at the end of the day, actually, I think it's really helpful.
Yeah.
So, taking a perspective of what do you already have in place? How can that be moved forward and combined in a way maybe to evolve into what ESTA will become?
Yeah. And that's exactly what we saw in the comments too, is a how, because I think a lot of we know kind of what it is and why it's happening, when it's happening, but now, okay, how do I implement this in my organization to make sure I'm compliant?
Sure.
And that is the tricky part, right?
Right.
Is understanding, how do we accrue for it? Who gets it? What are eligibility? And organizations all over are going through this. You're not alone there. We at HR Collaborative, we are going to be partnering with Merckforce, Mercantile Bank, in February to talk about strategies on how to set your system up for success to make sure you're, doing all that you can to be compliant with that. So more information on that to come. If you're not already subscribed to our newsletter or getting our emails, please do. That information will be included in there. We, of course, AI, we talked a little bit about this, so no surprise there that it's also a theme that was talked about in the groups. That's really how HR can spearhead AI in your organization. Really taking this as an opportunity. If this isn't a topic that's being discussed, that HR can really shape the narrative and be a leader in communicating how AI will undoubtedly be used in your organization and the appropriate, use of such. Some things that organizations are going to need to be aware of or cautious of are the high-risk use areas. Hiring, firing, promotions, compensation decisions, where traditionally we've looked at how humans kind of vet candidates, go through resumes, make those decisions. We've talked about, can you justify how you made that decision, or what are your parameters? We're going to have to do the same using AI. So AI may help streamline those processes, help kind of do some of that vetting. But as an organization, we need to be prepared to defend it if anyone were to say that your system has those biases, those biases built into it. And so we're going to have to do a lot of validation and checking those parameters, because that could get you in trouble pretty quickly.
Sure. So just like any other technology from an HR perspective, approach it from the back end. What is the admin side of it? Do you know where this is coming from and why and how? Because this, the AI concept may have a perspective and may have an angle. And if that angle turns out to be a bias, then, that may be something you're held accountable for.
Yeah. And you can't just say, oh, we didn't do it. AI did it.
No,
if you're going to use the tool,
you still did.
You
still did
responsible for it. Absolutely. Retention versus recruitment. So a few of the groups had indicated that, hey, 2024 was a great year for recruiting. We were able to fill some critical roles, fill some open roles that we had traditionally had difficulty in, but now we're facing retention concerns. Like, how do we filled these roles great. Now, how do we keep these people? And it really boils down to engagement and development of your talent. So how do we make sure that our employees feel valued, that they're part of the organization, that they're really integrated into our culture, mission, vision, values? And then how do we continue to develop them to make sure that we're investing in them as part of the organization? They're not just cogs in a wheel.
I was just going to say, when you think of engagement and development, when was the last time that you did? I know we all sometimes in HR are like, okay, the employee satisfaction survey, they want us to flip everything over and do it, redo it, change everything. Well, you can take that in baby steps, but get a temperature check, see what the organization is thinking. where are people's minds, you know, as we move, especially in this country, into another continuous dynamic of actually great change that may come in the new year.
Yeah, I think so many organizations, it's such a great point, because so many organizations are like, well, if we do a survey, we got to do something about it. But it's almost, you know, you also want to, don't you want to know what you're like, this is a great opportunity, like your employees share with you what their feedback is. It doesn't have to be complex. It can be very simple.
And there's so many great systems out there. I mean, even, you know, you can create your own surveys in Google now, right?
Yeah.
And you can measure those analytics pretty quickly and think of those baby steps, you know, think of one thing at a time. Don't think of the whole big picture.
Yeah, like you can really, you know, chunk it off.
Absolutely.
Team building and cohesion. We saw a few groups talking about leadership team building and cohesion. How do we work together? But there's also that concept of cohesion across organization, across departments, you know. Succession planning for key roles and leaders. And like, as we talked about earlier, there can be other roles that are just as critical to the organization that may not be leadership roles. A term that we were introduced to was the silver tsunami. So understanding that the older generations are retiring, they're moving out of the workforce, and what the impact it's going to have on organizations is that's going to be harder to find senior leaders or senior experienced executives. Maybe senior is not the right term, but seasoned, experienced executives outside of the organization. So organizations are really going to have to focus on building up those skills within the organizations, because they're not going to have as large of a pool to pick from externally.
And then you think, well, if those individuals are out there and maybe they're retired, how can we bring that perspective back in? Is it a consultative basis? You know, is
fractional?
Sure, fractional, like HR Collaborative does a lot of fractional things, right? So who knows? But there's a way to merge those pieces together, create a new path forward with a variety of, I think you said 5 generations, is that right?
Yeah, wow. It's crazy. Career pathing. So again, that just like what we said is that career pathing within and outside the organization. Some large organizations have very defined career paths. Others, we know that once you get to a certain level, unless another person leaves, there's not necessarily that next step. So we have to be prepared for those roles that we know we can develop internally, and those that we have to be prepared that may exit to get that next level. And a lot of all of this really boils down to change management, which you had highlighted earlier. Is change management is probably a constant theme, right?
Absolutely.
We all have to be prepared for change. But what I've seen in the comments is a lot around mergers and acquisitions, organizations. When leaders, owners of organizations, there's no longer that multi-generational ownership where they're handing it down to their child who wants to run it. Like a lot of these organizations are looking at selling their company to a new entity versus or to a new individual. It could be, it doesn't have to be acquired by a larger organization, but it's no longer generational ownership where it's just passed down. There's changes that come with that. So change management is crucial in that. So
and an exit is a plan.
It
might not seem like it at first, but it sure is.
Yeah. So those are a lot of the great themes, some of which Jordan spoke about earlier, some of which are new. I'd like to open it up to our facilitators just to see if there's anything that we didn't cover in here. Jamie, was there anything, maybe one thing that rose to the surface that we didn't talk about here that your group talked about?
Well, I'll put in a request on behalf of, I'll back up to the very first one, that ESTA, that we're all figuring it out whether we like it or not. It would be nice if, and hopefully it's coming, once sort of the dust settles on some of the potential regulatory changes, it would sort of be nice to have like a published cheat sheet on what it is and what it isn't, or if there can be some loose guidelines, just looking for a little bit more concrete information, because we're still hearing that so many leaders and the people in this room, their people are feeling like, because of how it gets administered, they feel like something's being taken away rather than no, it actually helps you. So how to package it so that people don't feel like I took away PTO from you. And in reality, how to tell the real story so that all of us are not the villains in this, but that it is serving its original intent. We hit on the recruiting retention, and I will quote a colleague of mine, Matt Gemolo, who said, retention is the best recruiting strategy. And part of that, we talked about development as an investment and a way to really do that. We were all inspired to make sure we did have an AI policy in our organizations. I'm still hearing that they love the wow factor of like, that was super cool. I just read that big complicated report for me and I understood it. But there also still a decent amount of apprehension from a privacy standpoint,
Sure.
personal information. And that I feel like we're still, can't decide which we should be excited or afraid, right?
Yeah, got that. And can I, before you take all the great ideas, I want to give our other facilitators a chance too. Julie, any one thing rise to the surface for your group that we didn't talk about already?
Oh, can you see me okay? We actually touched on engagement as a big part of retention and just understanding the individual needs, really, level setting with what motivates each individual from that retention standpoint, using CEO lunches or breakfasts to get connected depending on the size of the organization. How do you start to engage with each team member to understand what motivates them, what's going to help them continue to grow in their path? Benefits was a big topic. How can we get creative with benefits to build that retention as well? Not a lot of focus on ESTA in our group. I took a minute to do a little public service announcement, but it didn't seem like it was an area that was a big concern. So it kind of depends on the roles that we're in too. So, and last but not least, I think we, with AI, we just looked at some creative ways that we could look at educating, because we recognize that educating around AI is going to be the focus for the year to come. So Dan, anything that I missed in our notes here?
Oh yeah, I'd say that is about covering it. Like you said, just the creative ways to do the retention with the engagement and the benefits. Some smaller things that maybe competitors aren't doing, like the pet insurance we talked about, and just different small things like that that can help improve retention.
Sounds like a great topic for a future cafe. I love it. Anything else, Teresa or Matt? I know we want to save time for Q&A, but is there anything else that we didn't mention or that the groups haven't highlighted that you'd like to toss in before we hop over to that?
Really, for me, I guess my realization was the more things change, the more they stay the same. I still think, depending on, HR is such a huge function with so many facets to it, and we still need sexual harassment training. We still, depending on your industry, talent acquisition and recruiting is still an issue. So it's great that we've got our eye on these things, these trends, but there's still where the rubber, meets the road, or whatever the saying is. There's still a lot of the HR stuff that still needs to happen. That's just so foundational to what we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and in our group, one of the things that hasn't really been touched on a ton, we mentioned leadership changes. A number of the individuals in our group had new leaders in the last few months or about to have new leaders, and really just the change that brings, but also the nervousness maybe around those changes. How does that affect me particularly? And so talk about some of the communication strategies or the need for good communication strategies to touch base with every person and make sure that they feel heard, that those fears are kind of dissuaded. So again, not let those run away into I'm just too nervous and too scared of these changes and move on. So yeah, it's great conversations with today.
Well, thanks for taking us home, Matt. I know that you've been tasked with the big chore of monitoring the chat. So for any of you out there, any participants that have a question for Jordan and I, or just for the benefit of the group, please use the chat function to put your to enter your questions in there. We'll try to answer as many as we reasonably can within the time, but we know sometimes we have lots more questions than we have time to answer in our brief time this morning at the cafe. So if we don't get your question, we'll make sure that we follow up afterwards. So with that, Matt, do we have any burning questions in the chat that the team would like Jordan or I or the better of the group to chime in on?
Let's see, not questions just yet, but one question that we talked a little bit about that I'm curious to know from the two of you. We talked about, our group did talk about ESTA, in the respect of, kind of comparison with the FLSA changes of, didn't expect FLSA to change, but it did.
Right.
Whereas with ESTA, we do expect it to keep changing. And so what's kind of your hope or your thoughts on the best times to really start diving into that, to start making policy around it that isn't too soon, but isn't too late, where you don't leave yourself enough time to act on it?
The answer's a few months ago.
Yeah.
So-
I was gonna say now, if you haven't done anything, don't
So,
plan on it changing.
Yeah, and trust us, there are so many great resources out there. So take a look at our session with Barnum. That's a really, I felt from an HR mind perspective as an HR person, they broke it down so simply. And even still, it can be intimidating, but that's a great place. But there's so many other resources. I think we have a blog we'll share as well.
Yeah.
That we'll continue to modify going forward. But one thing that came to mind, and it was something that Jamie said about how scary it is. And that was that, remember when FMLA was scary? Do you remember? I mean, it still can be, but do you remember when it was like, what, who, 12 weeks? For what? What do you know? And it's, think about it that way, it's really take the baby steps, look at the details. How do you already have something in place that maybe can evolve into that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it with FLSA, this happened in 2016, so not super surprised it happened in 2024 as well, where it's like the 11th hour, they gave us a little more heads up this time. But we don't expect ESTA to have as drastic a shift or a stop like the federal government or federal mandates do, right? The federal government has a little more pull. At the state level, we don't expect them to move as quickly to stop that. So if you haven't started preparing for it, we highly encourage you to start thinking about it today, and be prepared for it to go into effect the way it is. The events that we did with Barnum was from the legal perspective, so we got to know kind of what attorneys are anticipating or how it's being interpreted. And then the event that we did with the Grand Rapids Chamber was really to raise awareness about kind of the gray areas that we're not quite sure how that will be interpreted by the government, by the state. And so the chamber's doing a lot of work at understanding what does this mean. So if it can, as it continues to evolve, because it will, the one thing that's part of the gray area is that there's really no precedent set yet because there's no case law because it hasn't gone into effect. So what we're encouraging our clients to do and organizations to do is really design their programs and their solutions with assuming or going into it with the best intent to be compliant. If you can show, that the effort was made to comply with the particular requirements of the law, and if ultimately we find that one slip, if we can show that we've done our best effort to be compliant, I'm not an attorney, so this is not legal advice, but I would assume that there will be some leniency or some time to correct it before any negative action would be taken on the organization if we can show our best intent.
And change is hard. That part is difficult to contemplate. How do we morph or finesse that dynamic of a takeaway perspective? But I don't think there will necessarily, I'm not sure, be lawsuits about they took 5 days of PTO away from me and gave me sick time. I don't think we're going to see that. So how do we message that? How do we communicate that?
It's not, it won't be illegal. It won't be a lawsuit.
It'll be
a cultural impact.
Cultural impact. Indeed.
Absolutely. So it's still, we understand it's still on top of everyone's mind. We could, again, do a whole webinar on that. But we know that there's other things you're focusing on too. Anything else out there from the Q&A side, Matt, that folks are questions burning for him?
Yeah, something that popped up was, what are some things that we can do in our organizations if HR doesn't have the seat at the table, when it comes to connect with leadership or to really help make those larger cultural changes.
Burden, I'd love to hear what you're working through with clients.
Absolutely. That again also can evolve with time. And so I think whatever your seat is, whether it is there or is elsewhere, you're still present in the organization. I mean, you still have a purpose. And so find a way to, on your own, if it's not already bought in or an element of buy-in from leadership, how will your HR role influence others in the responsibilities you do have and the impact you are making? So rather than focus on what is not taking place, take a focus towards what you are doing, and find a through line there to communicate additional perspectives and ideas. Even if you don't have a seat at the table, you likely may have productive working relationships with other, first ranking middle managers and so forth. other employees, figure out who those key champions are to share the HR message and find those team dynamics. You're there for a reason, even if it is to pay everybody weekly, bi-weekly, you know.
Pretty important
But,
job.
I mean, I'd say, you know, when people don't get paid, we hear about it. So find those opportunities in what does exist in how you are impacting, because you are impacting the organization every day, whether or not you realize it. So, you know, you can progress that.
Yeah, I love that. It's like, you know, finding those internal ambassadors of
Mhm.
HR, right? It may not be
Exactly.
senior
I love
leaders, but it's like,
ambassador.
yeah,
Great word,
yeah,
great
it's like,
word.
hey, our production manager knows how important it is that we get somebody onboarded
Mhm,
quickly
mhm.
and they're up to speed and we have them all their training material, and they have everything to hit the ground running.
Sure.
And have them kind of weigh it like, yeah, gosh, you know,
Mhm.
HR really helps with this. I
Mhm.
love this.
Mhm.
And then we talked about the data piece earlier too, is
Mhm.
leveraging the data to tell the
The
story
story.
that would be
Mhm.
meaningful to that leader that
Right.
you're trying
Mhm.
to have that influence with. So.
Yeah, and with a session like this, you know, that I think we try to do it monthly, maybe it's every other month sometimes, or other various webinars that are out there. Take those networking opportunities and tap into your community, because sometimes it's not always going to be the internal dynamic. It's going to be
Sure.
how you find your HR connections, whether it's, you know, joining boards, participating in other organizations, or even just sharing HR knowledge with your network.
Yeah, that's great advice. I have time for one last question. Anything else, any burning questions out there, Matt, or did we?
Hey, Lisa Brown, Lisa Brown.
Yes.
I thought someone brought up in our group, DEI, right? So like we talked a little bit about that. I mean, you know, it was such a hot topic, right? And we looked at our trends and like, you know, what are organizations doing? Where's the pendulum? It just feels like, I don't know. Any thoughts or comments on that?
The first thing that comes to mind to me is the generational inclusion.
Sure.
So I think we all probably by now have heard and read a variety of perspectives from how SHRM is presenting it as I and D now. So the E, which, not that it's irrelevant, but it's sort of blended among the I and the D.
piece,
So inclusion and diversity is sort of that new thought pattern or thought leader dynamic. So the generational piece is key. You know, as we approach a variety of changes in our country, I think finding ways that, you know, what groups are represented in your organization and how can employee resource groups play a role there.
Sure.
If you're a really small organization, are there similar organizations in your industry that you could partner with for cultural perspectives?
Yeah. And you know, that's a great topic. That it's like diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, really, because we want everybody to feel like they belong with the organization, or as part of your organization is always going to be important. I think it really is woven into every aspect of the employee life cycle. So we think about, you know, is our employee base reflective of the community? Are we celebrating holidays that are inclusive of everyone, generationally,
right?
You know, different dynamics, race, ethnicity.
Flexibility plays a big role in belonging and inclusion.
Yeah. And then just understanding, you know, what that flexibility or what those accommodations, or how can we structure our workforce to really be inclusive of all, and then making sure our language is inclusive of all.
Right.
That again, there's definitely more evolving there, but it is still at the forefront, and I think it's woven in a lot of the different initiatives that HR is going to be focusing on in 2025 because everything's changing. All right. Well, thank you all for your question. If we didn't get to your question, I apologize. We will get to you. We'll respond to you individually if we need to. Huge thank you to all of you for attending, and thank you, Jordan, for being our panelist here today. So with that, if you're on the roads today, travel safe, stay warm, and we look forward to seeing you happy, healthy in 2025. So have a great day, everyone.